Hello, good morning. This is our third Premiere webinar, and I'd like to welcome. Today, our title is Understanding the Specifics of Multi-Actor Approach in Your Call. We have three speakers who are our guests today, and we will talk about best practices for writing a successful multi-actor proposal. We will follow up with the question how to align the multi-actor approach with different project types. And then we have some practical tips to effectively integrate the multi-actor approach into your proposal. Some real-life examples will be shared with you by our experienced project coordinators. So I'd like to welcome Michele Sgrivins and Anda Mazanfriskova from Baltic Studies Center in Latvia. And they will speak, they have prepared a presentation, which Michele will present, about structural engagement with multi-actor project calls. And the aim is to understanding a little bit better the specifics of the multi-actor approach in the call. Elke's presentation has the title, Every Word is Important. Elke Rogge represents Ilvo from Belgium. And our last speaker today will be Andrew Fieldsend. He's also a partner in Eberswalde University. And the title of his presentation is What the Evaluators Will, or at least should be, looking for concerning the multi-actor approach in your project proposal. And before we start with our dear guests, I would like to give a very short introduction. So please, the next slide. Yes, so that's the overview of our next 1.5 hours. Short welcome and opening from my side. My name is Susanne von Münchhausen. I represent Eberswalde University and the coordinating team. We have then the three speakers, including a short questions and answer and open panel discussion after that. And in the end, a few closing remarks. Next, please. So that's me. I've always introduced myself. And now we move on. So a few words for this series of Premiere webinars. The webinars provide information about multi-actor specificities for those engaging in multi-actor project proposals. We address general aspects crucial for proposal writing. That's what you might think when you follow our webinars. However, we aim to take a particular focus on the multi-actor requirements and what needs to be taken into account when these requirements are taken seriously, in particular for the preparation and interpretation of the call topic text. So let's move on. Short, very few words about Premiere. It is a coordination and support action, and that might be relevant because we will hear more about the different types of projects in this webinar today. We are also a multi-actor project, which consists of 15 diverse organizations from across Europe, based in 12 EU member states. Coordinator is Eberswalde University in northeastern Germany. We started in 2003 and we will end in December 27. So we have quite a little bit of time to provide support and develop material for proposal developers. It's around €5 million project. We are busy on social media, so please follow us, and our homepage is also updated regularly. Next, please. This is a quick overview of the material and services that the Premiere project provides. In terms of community, we have a Premiere LinkedIn 100+ club. We test seed funding that will start very soon now, and we have regular networking and brokerage events. We have a newsroom where we do reflexive blogs and testimonials, YouTube channels, all about the multi-actor approach and how to be applied in the proposal development phase. We are at the moment developing a MOOC on multi-actor approach. As today, we have the webinars. There is a tool repository that will provide access to lots of tools. And then we have published a pathway cartoons. You will hear more from them in a minute. There's the mummy game, a simulation game for workshops, a serious game under development, and train the trainer up and coming. Next one, please. So more is to come. Please follow our Premieres engagement campaign towards September 25. And why do we highlight September 25? Because that is the deadline for submission of the next round of Cluster 6 proposals. The multi-actor approach is also in other calls of the Horizon program, but now many people are very interested in the calls to come, to be published end of April, early May, with submission date in September 25. So that's where we are aiming for this year. Next one. So I said many things are similar in the different application process, proposal development process. So what actually makes the difference between a multi-actor proposal and other normal, we could say, non-multi-actor proposals? So the Commission says, and here that's a citation, applicants are expected to meet the 7 multi-actor requirements. So each multi-actor proposal needs to explain how the objectives of the proposal target the user's needs, which challenges and opportunities from practice need to drive the specific objectives, and they need to drive the methodology as well as the pathways to impact shown in the proposal. The second requirement, here the proposal needs to explain how the project, including the composition of the consortium, has a balanced choice of relevant key actors with complementary knowledge to prepare practice-ready results. Our webinar number 2 focused on this particular issue. And then the third requirement asked the proposal developers to explain how existing practices and tacit knowledge will be used with a sufficient number of knowledge exchange activities. And number 4 is multi-actor projects need an engagement process that is properly facilitated. So the proposal need to show how the engagement process within the consortium, so that is one dimension, among actors with the core group, and how the management process within the consortium and the ongoing work of the co-creation process is facilitated. And then the other dimension of this point is how our stakeholder engagement activities are facilitated with workshops, platforms, and so on and so forth. So these 2 elements of facilitation need to be documented in the multi-actor proposal. And then number 5, next one. The projects need to show how the development, the new work program, and the idea of that is what is going to be developed in the project, complements existing research and best practices. So this is very common also in classic research project proposals. They also need to show how the project goes beyond state of the art. But in multi-actor projects, this state of the art and how the project goes beyond this needs also to refer to good practices. And then number 6, the proposal need to show how activities result in practical and ready-to-use knowledge, tools, products that are easily accessible for practitioners. And then the last one, the proposal needs to show how these outputs will feed into the existing dissemination channels most consulted by the users in the regions, in the different countries, and in the different sectors. So for example, that could be the WhatsApp group used by the farmers union in a certain country, or a Facebook group of local firefighters, or the YouTube channel of drone users, and so on and so forth. So all this needs to be shown in the proposal. And then next one. So what we did, and I gave a longer presentation on this in the brokerage event, the presentation is also available, is we made an analysis of the incorporation of the multi-actor requirements in the draft Cluster 6 call topics 2025. So note, this is all based on drafts because the publication of the final call topics is not yet available. However, what we did, and Michaelis will refer to this, and that's why I explained very briefly the methodology, we had a look at the draft work program, then identified the different introductions to the different chapters after, so that's the different, I jumped for the second one. So the first one is the analysis of the introduction of the work program. There are the 7 multi-actor requirements. And then we dig deeper into the tables of the different call topics because they indicate if this particular call topic text has the multi-actor requirements, has to be the eligibility condition that the multi-actor approach needs to be applied. And then we looked into the text bodies of the different call topics and made a quantitative and qualitative analysis. Next one. So in this analysis, we used the color coding. Just to show how it worked, I will not go into depth now. So different colors for the different areas of the 7 multi-actor requirements. And then what we've seen, next one, is that most of the references in the text bodies of the call topic texts refers to the composition of the consortium. Then there are few references to the use of existing practices and tacit knowledge, much less, but also available. And then very few calls refer to targeting the needs and challenges and opportunities for the users. This does not mean that the other requirements are not needed, but they are not explicitly mentioned in the text body. And with that, I would like to hand over to Michaelis. But before, this is a short overview of the webinars, just to remind you, we will come back to that later on again. So the next one will be in April. But anyway, now we start with understanding the specifics of multi-actor approach. Thank you very much for your attention. And I hand over to Michaelis Grivins.
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Miķels Grīviņš. I'm here today with my colleague Anda Adamson-Viskoviča, and we will be giving presentation titled Structural Engagement with Multi-Actor Approach Project Calls. So it is already a very complicated title for our presentation, but let me assure you that it's a simplified version, and Anda was brave enough to delete the second line. Initially, the title was much more longer. What we are trying to do in this presentation is to give some first overview of our ongoing work, where we are trying to find interlinkages between different types of Horizon Europe project calls and the ways how people can introduce multi-actor approach in their proposal. Or to rephrase, if we know that multi-actor approach is very sensitive to particular actors that you can engage or particular outcomes that you are seeking in your project, and we know that these project types presupposes different actors on different outcomes, then we can assume that there are some better ways how you structure multi-actor approach for each of these types that are available in Horizon Europe funding program. So when I talk about the project types, what I mean are these 3 types that are listed in Horizon Europe program. First of them being research and innovation action, which typically focuses on developing new knowledge. And it presupposes relatively low. Sorry, something happened to my computer. Just a second. So it focuses on generating new knowledge, and in general, although it says that it expects the technological readiness level is so one of the criteria, in general, the expected technological readiness level is low, sort of it's not exceeding the level 6, and the funding rate is 100%. Innovation action, so it primarily focuses on new solutions. And so obviously for this particular type, the technological readiness level expected from the outputs is higher. It reached the level 8. And the major difference is that the funding rate for commercial bodies is substantially lower. It's just 70%. And finally, there is coordination and support action, which primarily focuses on knowledge exchange and networking and policy impact. For obvious reason, technological readiness level is not really a way how to talk about this particular type. The funding rate here is again 100%. And then if you look deeper, there are sort of this particular type is much more complex maybe than other types because there are wider deviations depending on which groups are targeted and what objectives are maybe set for these groups. But this is a separate conversation. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to actually engage in this particular aspect. So I think by now nobody have to be convinced regarding the fact that a multi-actor approach is a force to reckon with in these Horizon Europe Cluster 6 calls. So the impact of this particular way of thinking is just growing. However, what maybe is not stressed so often that this impact of multi-actor approach thinking is prevalent across all three types of these major types of project calls. So during the last decade, we have had more than 215 RIAs with this particular request, more than 100 coordination and support actions, and more than 70 innovation actions. So what we know from other studies regarding multi-actor approach, that if I might use my own terminologies, and it could be interpreted as a great amplifier. Basically, what it means is that if in your call you have particular knowledge that is needed, or particular sort of challenge, or particular sort of alignment of actors, what we see once we put on top of that multi-actor approach, immediately all of these challenges or sort of the tasks become more prominent, and you have to engage with them, so allocate more time for those and have to be more vigilant on how you play out those. The second thing is, while so there has been this push towards multi-actor approach, there remains in Horizon Europe calls this very prominent component of academic thinking. Namely, in the part of excellence, there in proposals, there is still this argument that you need to present your idea in a very particular way. And thus, on the one hand, proposals are expected to present this multi-actor approach way and show how it will be implemented on the project. On the other hand, proposals are also expected to show this thinking that aligns with academic discourse, which might be quite challenging at times. Looking at what's happening now, and Suzanne partly already sort of indicated this, so our analysis looking at the forthcoming call, which has to be taken with a grain of salt, because while the program has been leaked, the official program will be announced only in May. But we already see that multi-actor approach still plays a very prominent role in this program, and we already see that 30 topics, which is a little bit less than 40% of the calls, have this multi-actor approach as eligibility condition, and for additional 9 topics, it is strongly encouraged that multi-actor approach is used. So based on that, there is this obvious questions of how do you adopt multi-actor approach for each of these 3 types. As I said, we are very much in the middle of our analysis what to do with that, and everything that we say is still sort of work in progress. But what we can say already is that if you look at research and innovation action, it's mainly sort of engaging different end users across all the stages of research implementation, which means that you are co-creating your research questions and then you are implementing your research together with end users. So we are highlighting participatory research methods as one of the ways how to do it, but of course, sort of practice shows that there are very many ways how to do it. One thing that we very clearly see is where people who are putting together these proposals need to pay attention is to find structured ways how to ensure that there are these knowledge exchange mechanisms, particularly because so this particular type has this higher opportunity for knowledge difference on how people frame their knowledge and what knowledge they are bringing to the table when they are joining the project. So innovation action, as I said before, it's about new solutions. And in general, when we sort of see how different actors are engaged in these projects, it's related to continuous engagement in following up on how these solutions can be used in real life settings. Basically, it's piloting and testing, and then also improving the capacities and knowledge of the potential end users so that they could benefit from these novel solutions. And then when it comes to coordination and support actions, it's mainly about building knowledge hubs and so bringing different actors together and helping these actors to circulate best practices, best practices, and ensure that these networks benefit from that. And on the other hand, coordination support action also tends to benefit from the fact that they are bringing these different experts in one network and use that to maybe facilitate some policy impacts. So that's one way how to think it, and that's very straightforward and not maybe so interesting. But on the other hand, we have a different way how maybe it makes more sense and maybe it shows better what are the challenges of these three types. And my slide will become very messy very quickly, but bear with me and I hope it will make sense to you very soon. So basically, another way how we are trying to think about what is happening with these three types is by looking at different potential tensions that emerge within these consortia or within the groups of people who are writing or putting together these project proposals. And for research and innovation action, of course, there can be many tensions, but one that we notice is sort of, or one that is more prominent and maybe more often discussed is about the role of academic publications, where the actors that are coming from academic background clearly appreciate that as a very strong deliverable and often put it forward, showing that this is what we will deliver. While for other actors, the value of this particular type of deliverable might not be so obvious, and sort of there are a risk of tension of what is the optimum deliverable coming out of these projects. For innovation action, it's getting back to the question of the funding rate that is allocated for different types of partners. Since commercial partners are receiving 70%, what might end up happening is that there are some greater expectations regarding who will own the intellectual property rights after the project. And this again might cause some tensions there. And for coordination and support action, it's about sort of how to balance this knowledge production and creation of networks. Or for some actors, it can be mainly about extending their networks and ensuring that there are these networks available sort of to broad range of stakeholders. Meanwhile, for others, it might be to using these networks to actually generate some new insights and generate some new perspectives on how things should be done. So these are two ways how to regard project types. The third one, we have not yet linked directly to the project types, but I think that's one of the directions where we will go very soon, which is looking at different partners that might be engaged more prominently in the project and the thinkings that these partners are bringing in the project. And so we know from the research that we have done in Premier is that civic society thinking about actors often putting in the center real impact rather than producing deliverables, present a completely different perspective from that's coming from researchers who sort of are thinking about a different type of deliverables, but also about academic integrity and about particular way how to think about things which might not sit well with other actors. On the other hand, we see that policymakers require a lot of time to make decisions because quite often it's tied to particular structures in the background that the project might not see. And then for industry, probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. There is a constant question of what benefit it brings for the particular enterprise that might be joining or particular actors that's joining. And these, of course, again, if you keep in mind the different ways how people are thinking, that might help you to understand how to structure the different types of project proposals that you are working with. We don't immediately have a silver bullet that would help to overcome all the challenges that you might face. However, what our research is pointing to is that often, even if you don't have this silver bullet, the thing that saves you is a strong coordinator or strong coordination. And then again, in our work, what we see is that basically different partners from various consortia stress that if the consortium have a strong leadership at the center of all the activities that are conducted, that might sort of align all the different issues that our consortium is facing. And sort of, if I, at the beginning of this presentation said that multi-actor approach is this great amplifiers and project coordinator is sort of these great mitigators that can sort of correct the trajectory and maybe counteract and resolve the challenges that are created by multi-actor approach. With that being said, I have one more slide left, and this is basically reference to some of the deliverables that we have produced in the Premier project. More particularly, these are pathways on how one can come up with a multi-actor approach project proposal. These pathways are not yet linked to particular types, but I imagine that might be one of the next steps that we will look more closely to these different pathways and think how they are, sort of which of the pathways might be more prominent in particular type. But even if it's not linked immediately with this particular thinking, I think if you will go to the website indicated in the middle of the slide, you will find that there are some healthy and helpful tips on how to think about your proposal and research types, and research project types in general. So with that being said, I thank you for listening to me and pass floor to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikilis, for your presentation. I remind you that if you have questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A section in the bar on the bottom of this screen. And now I would like to hand over to Elke Rogge, who is our next speaker. Every word is important. So we are curious to hear you, Elke. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elke. As you can see, I'm the scientific director of the social sciences unit at ILVO, which is the Institute for Fisheries and Agricultural Research in Flanders. Within this group at this moment, we are active partners in 25 Horizon Europe or Horizon 2020 projects. So that's a lot of project writing, if you know that chances of actually winning the proposal are quite small. It's of course not only me that's doing that, it's a large group of people, and actually some of my colleagues are way more experienced in the writing than I am. But I was asked to tell you something about making an interpretation of the call, the project call. So my title is Every Word is Important. If you screen the call, it's important to check every word. Yeah, can I, does it go to the next slide by itself or? Yeah, so of course, first of all, it's interesting and very important to screen all the general information in the call. So are we dealing with a single or two stage? What type of action are we talking about? What are the multi-actor, is it a multi-actor call or not? Michaelis and Susanna already told you something about the multi-actor requirements. What are the deadlines? What's the indicative budget? How many projects will be granted under this call, etc. So it's a lot of general information just to take in and to be aware of. And then when we go to the next slide, I gave some information on the types of actions. Michael has already told you quite a lot about this, so I will not go into detail. But the ideas concerning the multi-actor approach is that you will need different partners and especially different roles of these partners in the different types of actions. So if you're working on a research and innovation action, for example, probably a university or a research institute will take on the lead of the project, so will be a coordinator. Whereas in, for example, CSA, so coordination and support action, that isn't really a necessity. So here in this type of action, the idea is mainly to focus on research and to establish new knowledge, staying in the lower TRL levels. But here again, if we're talking about a multi-actor approach, it's still important to involve all the other types of actors, industry, SMEs, public authorities, and also nonprofit organizations or NGOs. When we are going to the next slide, to the innovation action, the idea is more to develop prototypes of product, services, or processes. And here industry and SMEs, for example, play a crucial role because the idea is that you develop a product or a service that is quite close to commercialization, and then you will need the industry and the SMEs to, after the project, go to an effective commercialization of a product. So although they can also be involved in the research actions, here they will probably take on a more active role. It's also important to have the end users here so that they can give feedback on the product, so that you make something that people will be interested in. You might need public authorities specifically for the legal aspects and the regulations surrounding the product or the service that you are trying to develop. So you see that most of the times it's the same kind of partners, but with a different focus or a different role. And then in the last type of action, we have the coordination and support actions. There, the focus is on standardization, dissemination, awareness raising, communication, networking. So actually existing knowledge, trying to spread and implement existing knowledge. So here again, you might need the research organizations so that they can provide the expertise that they already have. But focus of these types of projects is not on developing new knowledge, so not on developing new research. Here again, industry might be interesting to involve if you're talking about standardization, for example, across different EU countries. You might need policymakers and NGOs. They can have an interesting role in awareness raising and things like this. Okay, every word is important. I'm just going to tell you some things that we often do, that we have as a common practice within our institute. And I know that everybody handles this in a different way. So just some things how we do it, and then you can see whether you find them useful or not. So first of all, you have the scope of the call in which the commission itself, they write the challenge that they want to focus on. And often the direction of the solution is already given in this description. And here what we find interesting, if it's possible, is to look whether you can see on which documents they have based their calls. Because often you can see a link with maybe a recent paper that has been published, a policy document, a white paper. So if you can retrace where they based their ideas for the call on, then this might give you some advantage. Because if you then go deeper into this paper or a policy document or whatever, you can maybe better understand in what direction they want you to go and in what direction they are looking for a proposal. So not always easy, but if you have people who are like experts and really on the topic, quite often they know what the nuances are in the call. Okay. Here I give you an example. Throughout the rest of my presentation, you will find the same example coming back. So this is just a screenshot from an existing case. It's a case of a project that is now up and running in our unit. And here you see, so the challenges are described, but also the things that I indicated in red, for example, you already see in what kind of direction they want you to go and what kind of research they want you to do. So here they definitely want research towards behavioral shifts, behavioral research, experimental research on behavior. So these are things, and you might think, oh, when I'm talking about this challenge, I would do something differently. I would go into a different direction, but it's already indicated here that they really want this type of research. So then it's interesting to stick to this type of research. A second element in red here is that it's also definitely stressed that you need a systems approach. So you need to have a comprehensive picture of the food system, of governance mechanisms and dynamics. So it's not only the individual behavior of the farmer or the persons we are talking about, but it's also the entire system. Okay. The second part, or not the second, because sometimes it's in the other way around, but always mentioned are the expected outcomes. My colleagues stressed, you should say that every word is important, but especially the verbs, because the verbs indicate what kind of action that they are looking for. What do they want you to do in the project? I will give some examples of this later. What we often do is that we use the outcomes and we use them as a first kind of structure, very draft structure for our proposal, because a number of outcomes are mentioned, and then often it is quite possible to attach a couple of actions or work packages or things that you want to do to each of these outcomes. And I will give an example in the next slide. So first of all, yeah, sorry for the one who is, yeah, it's a lot of it's a lot of clicking here. So the first thing is that there in yellow you see all of the following expected outcomes are important. It's just 3 little words, but it's important. So it's not the idea that they expect 6 outcomes and you can choose 3 of them that you think are most interesting. No, you should address all of these outcomes. And then the first 3 kind of verb-like constructions is improved understanding, improved understanding, improved understanding. So for us, we translate into more research kind of work packages. So we need to understand things. Yeah. And about 3 different things. So here, and this is already very similar to the scope that we had. They want understanding on farming systems and the landscape level, so the general level. They want understanding on the farmer's individual behavior. So that were the behavioral experiments that they were referring to. And then here a 3rd element is added. They also want understanding of consumers and decision-making in the market. So in the scope, the consumers are not mentioned this explicitly, but if they are mentioned here, as 3 elements of improved understanding, then you should take all 3 of them along. Next, we see improved business strategies and relationship building. So that's a different type of action. For us, that's not then research, but maybe here we are talking about dialogues, about networking, about setting up communities to try to learn more. And then they are talking about a design and implementation of policy. Also, another type of work package that maybe if we compare to the understanding of the first 3, and then improved capacities of researchers, we might translate that in a kind of training activity, can be in different forms, can be online, can be physical, can be through a MOOC or whatever, but it's a different type of activity. So the expected outcomes for us, they are the beginning of building a structure, and this is what you see here. These, yeah, it's okay. These are just drafts that nobody has ever seen them except people in the consortium. So it's taking all the words out of the text, it's trying to group the words, it's trying to make a structure. So that was the first structure that was made based on, for example, the outcomes, and then this gradually evolves into a work package structure. So if you see the next slide, this is an in-between version then based, and you will see the same, you will see the landscape level and the systemic level, and you will see the individual level reappearing. And then in the last slide, If you go there, I think this in the end was a final work package structure. So there you can see these different types of activities. For example, enhancing policy design. It's actually also trying to use literally the same words as they are mentioned in the call. And then, okay. So these are just a bit general, common practices, how we use that. Another thing that we mention is that every word is important. If they in the call refer to, for example, certain groups, agriculture and forestry, agriculture and aquaculture, at that point it's important to address both of them and not to choose, we will only work with forestry. One way of dealing with this is, for example, to work with cases, so that you see that you have at least one case from forestry or one case from aquaculture. So that's a type of way of how we deal with that. Okay, and then you also have often mentioned in the call that you need to involve certain groups, certain projects. I have it here in the slide. It's mentioned, for example, you need to collaborate with the projects funded under another call. And in this time, it's important to try to involve them, to try to engage with them. If the project is already up and running, because it's a project from a previous call, then we always try to find a partner who is in that project who can also be part of the consortium for the new call. Of course, when it's simultaneously, you will never know who will win the call in the other and for the other project call. So then it might be a bit difficult. Here again, we also try to cooperate if it's indicated, for example, the JRC, etc. Then it's important that you reach out to them. It might be that other specific groups or institutions are mentioned, and if that's the case, then it's interesting to reach out to them. Okay, and I think. The last one that I have mentioned here is that quite often at the end it is mentioned that you need expertise from the social science and humanities. And then we think it's important, if it's explicitly mentioned, then it's important to give them a central position in your work plan, and also to engage the right partners. Because we very often, because we are a social sciences unit, we are very often asked by very technical projects, very technical consortia, and then in the last 2 weeks, they see the last line, you need to involve the social sciences and humanities, and then they call us, can you be part of this, and can you do a very small task? Often we are not very inclined to do that, because when we see it like this, if you need to have an effective contribution of the social sciences, then we really want to set up the project around the social sciences, or at least give them a considerable contribution and not just one small task in the end. So that's my story. Those were more or less a little bit of the ins and outs of how we approach reading the call and trying to transform the call into a project proposal. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks a lot, Elke. Yeah, please put your questions and comments in the Q&A section, and we will discuss it after the next presentation. So happy to have you here, Andrew Fieldsend. We are curious to hear your presentation, and the title is What the Evaluators Will, or at least should be, looking for concerning the multi-actor approach in your project proposal. And you yourself, Andrew, you have been evaluating quite a few projects, I think.
Yes, I have done a few. I should introduce myself, Andrew Fieldsend. Despite what it says here, I'm an English person living in Hungary, but somehow I find myself associated with Eberswalde, which I'm quite happy about. I should start with an apology, I suppose. It's a consequence of being the last presenter that inevitably there's going to be a certain amount of duplication between what I've said and what others have said. And bearing in mind what the topic of the next seminar will be as well, I might even stray onto that. But I think it won't be such a problem to have the same thing said in a slightly different way. And to some extent, some of these remarks from me are personal opinions and personal experiences. And I'll start by saying that while evaluators do have a certain amount of guidance from the Research Executive Agency on how to evaluate a proposal, certainly when it comes to the multi-actor approach, that guidance is still fairly rudimentary. So they're not in a much better position than you are as a project proposal writing team. So I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the things that I think an evaluator or evaluators would be looking for when they read your project proposal in the context of the multi-actor approach. They'll be asking how, if at all, have users' needs been taken into account while formulating the proposal? How have the necessary skills and other capacities been put together in the consortium or wider community? And will these capacities be mobilized all along the project in the most effective way? They'll be looking for all those things. Then they will ask, has the consortium given sufficient thought on how to tailor outreach activities to the needs of different groups of stakeholders to ensure their constant input into the co-creation process and to maximize awareness and take-up of the innovation by prospective users both during and after the project? Now, as I've already mentioned, some of those points have been touched on already. I'll start, though, with a small observation on terminology, personal opinion. I rather prefer the term knowledge sharing rather than knowledge exchange. And I certainly don't like the term end user, which is really a legacy of past attitudes. We really should be talking about users rather than end users, and knowledge sharing when we're talking about the multi-actor approach. Discuss later if you wish. I should mention that essentially this is my only slide. You won't find lots of arrows and complicated tables in my presentation. Concerning the key features of the multi-actor approach, Susanna in particular has already gone into these in some detail. I just want to draw on 3 points that underpin my presentation. Firstly, that actors should work together all along the project, from collectively building the partnership, through designing the project and writing the proposal, to implementation and preparing the project outputs. Secondly, and just note this wording, the consortium must have access to and make use of all the necessary skills and capacities to achieve the objectives set out in the call. And these skills and capacities should be mobilized in the most efficient and effective ways. I see those as all being core principles of the multi-actor approach. And it's worth making a point at this stage that while Elke is absolutely right that every word is important when you're analysing the call text, every word is important in the project proposal as well, especially when you only have 30 pages. And we actually included almost half a page at the very beginning of the proposal describing how our understanding of the multi-actor approach. We had some external reviews prior to submission, and the reviewer said, "Hey, you can take that out. Everybody knows what the multi-actor approach is." In my view, they don't, and we left it in. And I'm pleased to say that the reviewers, the official reviewers, did start by saying that the proposal demonstrated a good understanding of the background of the call and the issues addressed by the topic. So I think we were right to say that this is our understanding of multi-actor approach. And I think that set us apart from some of the other proposals that were submitted to the same call. So moving on to the next slide, if we may briefly, what skills and capacities are needed in the consortium? And to shoot myself in the foot, really, because we put the half-page description of the multi-actor approach into the Premiera proposal, we actually didn't have space to put this in, unfortunately. But this was our exercise of going through the call text word by word and identifying all the capacities that we felt were necessary to deliver the proposed programme of work effectively. And I won't go through them all point by point, but certain issues related to policy and theory, not least a clear understanding of the multi-actor approach within the consortium. You can read these at your leisure. Moving on, though, to the next point, that networks, the partners' networks, are very, very important indeed. For example, to have an established relationship with the SCAR-ACCA Strategic Working Group, links with policymakers, links with practitioners, and so on. In terms of attitude, we're looking for willingness to deliver the project to a high standard. Direct implementation or of experience of implementing the multi-actor approach was something that we were able to point to within the consortium as well. In terms of actors' resources, capacity to be involved in proposal preparation, a capacity to be involved in implementation. I'll come back to those things later because they are important. And then a whole series of capacities that were really quite specific to the call text for Premiera, such as managing or using seed funding. And then finally, concerning outputs, a broad range of capacities to prepare everything from academic publications at one end of the scale through to practice abstracts at the other end of the scale. So we felt that we needed to tick all those boxes. And my feeling is that we did manage to do that. You may well want to do something similar when you're preparing your project proposal. So if we can go back. So who are the users? Well, hopefully the call text will give you some clear indication of who the expected users of the output of the project activities will be. But have you then defined them in the project proposal? I think it's important that you do that. Bear in mind that although in a lot of the EU documentation, there's a strong emphasis on farmers and farmers' organisations and perhaps on farm advisory organisations, they're not necessarily the most important groups of users for your particular topic. How have users' needs been identified? This is when you're formulating the call, when you're formulating the project proposal. Now, again, the call text may give you some suggestions on how you can go about identifying the needs of users. I do have various thoughts on that. And I'll start with the example of a superb Chagas project proposal, and I've forgotten both the acronym and the call topic, so I'm not giving away anything that's secret here, but it really was brilliant. And I was one of the evaluators. I immediately gave it 15 out of 15, and all the other evaluators did again. And needless to say, it secured the funding. And what they actually did was to conduct a series of user consultations prior to submitting the project proposal. And those consultations informed the detail of the proposed work. And that's the sort of thing maybe that the EU is looking for. But it's not that simple, because with the Premiera proposal, where the SCARAC Strategic Working Group is one of the major groups of users or potential beneficiaries of the outputs of Premiera. We should have gone to the SCARAC Strategic Working Group while writing the project proposal and said, we're thinking of doing this and we're thinking of doing that, and what's your opinion? Right, yeah. You know, there were probably prospective partners of other competing consortia in the SCARAC working group. So there was no way we were in a position to share our ideas with that group, even although theoretically we should have done. And what you will find often is that reality collides with theory, and you can't necessarily do it in the so-called ideal way. But just bear in mind that your consortium hasn't been parachuted in from Mars. Don't tell me that you don't already know something about the necessary requirements of prospective users. And quite honestly, if you don't, you shouldn't be participating in a consortium for that particular call anyway. And what we argued in Premiera was that we already had an extensive understanding of the needs of users, especially through the work that we'd previously done in Liaison. But of course, other partners that came into Premiera from other projects had contributed their own experience of users' needs from their previous work. So we emphasized that we had a clear understanding of users' needs without necessarily doing the kinds of user consultations that maybe the evaluators would be looking for. And the evaluators seem to be happy with that approach that we adopted there. So how well have users been or will be involved in the project? This is where this access to necessary skills and capacities comes in, because I would argue that it's not possible, despite what the EU calls for, to include all skills and competencies in the consortium. We would need to include every member of the SCARAC working group in the consortium to have all the necessary skills and capacities. Clearly not practical. Also, there are many user groups, and particularly individuals, who are not interested in being part of a consortium or don't have the capacity to be partners in the consortium. They don't have the administrative skills to manage being a partner in a funding program that years ago was originally designed for research organizations such as universities, with all the administrative requirements that universities can cope with, but maybe smaller organizations can't. Be also aware, as Elke, I think, emphasized, that different users or different actors will have contrasting motivations for being involved in the project. And that could lead to conflicts later in the delivery of the work. So you do have to ask, is it right to have the actor concerned actually within the consortium? Bear in mind, of course, that the motivation of the organization may be different from the motivation of the individual. For many organizations, quite honestly, it's a case of we need the money. Nonetheless, for the individuals involved, they are probably far more interested in identifying the outputs from the work planned and from working together with other organizations, with other persons. And I think you need to probably pay more attention to the chemistry of the individuals in the team, or certainly as much attention as to the profile of the organizations that are in the consortium. Be also aware, as I think Elke mentioned, that some partners have legitimate limitations on how open they can be. You know, the theory is that everybody shares everything all along the project. Well, quite honestly, in particular, some commercial organisations have information that is sensitive and they can't share. They may be really keen to work in a multi-actor way, but they have certain limitations, and just be aware that those limitations are there, and to the extent that you can, work around them. So if you can't involve everybody in the consortium, how do you solve this? Well, it's important to have constant dialogue. And I'm not talking just about dissemination, but dialogue with different groups of users all along the project, as we are doing today. We're not just telling you how it is. You know, Susanna is constantly asking for feedback from you, which we've fed into the further development of the Premiera programme of work. So there is now constant dialogue between Premiera and the Strategic Working Group. And you have to bear in mind that there is no one size all fits methodology for this dialogue. So what works with a strategic working group would not work with different types of users. So in Premiera, there are, again, as Susanna mentioned in one of her earlier slides, there's a broad range of user engagement tools being employed by the project, with special attention being made to get in touch with harder to reach groups. And the diverse networks of the consortium partners, which I emphasized earlier on in my presentation, is a very, very important tool for reaching the various users that you want to contribute to the work and to run with the outputs once the work programme concludes. So how are these skills and competencies going to be mobilised efficiently? Well, you must appreciate that if you're going to have different skills and competencies in the consortium, then you can't have these different actors all doing the same thing. So a simple example, you would probably have the academic actors taking the lead on writing the scientific papers for impact factor journals. You would probably have the practice partners taking the lead on writing how-to guides and similar user-focused outputs such as those. So just bear in mind that the evaluator will be looking to see how you have maximized the various different skills and capacities that you've involved in the consortium and in this larger periphery of engaged stakeholders. Sorry, a very long word. Hopefully somebody will come up with a simpler term at some point. So finally, how will the user take up be optimized? You need to demonstrate that the project will have a lasting impact. So it's no good just coming up with some useful outputs and then in the last few months of the project training some trainers and saying to them, okay guys, we'll leave it to you now, you can take it from here. What we're doing in Premiera is actually training the trainers at a very early stage or relatively early stage in the work plan or work program. And then we're mentoring them while they go on and train their own cohorts of trainees. And we feel that in that way, we will achieve a much greater penetration amongst users and take up amongst users of the project outputs. Don't forget as well that the outputs and the impact doesn't finish when the funding finishes. We are still publishing papers in impact factor journals from Liaison 3 years after the funding finished. And bear in mind, going back to this being parachuted in from Mars observation, that when Premiere is finished, no doubt the consortium partners, as Susanna's already implied, will then either as a group or separately take the expertise and the understanding of users' needs that they've accumulated and build on that further in further projects and further activities. So that's it from me. I think I've probably used up my 15 minutes. I hope that some of that is helpful and complements what's been said previously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very interesting explanations and some details from your vast reservoir of experiences. So we see lots of thumbs up for your presentation. Excellent. So we have 15 minutes for discussion, and please feel free and enter more questions into the chat or into the Q&A. I think, Bernardo, we don't have anything in the Q&A. We just have one question from Bojena in the chat. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, it was about the activities shown more prominently. That was a question referring to Michaelis. Maybe you can stop sharing the screen because we will come up to the next presentation later on when we finish.
Okay.
So we can see more our panelists and can enter the discussion. Michaelis, what was more prominently in one type of project than in another one?
Well, I tried to already explain to some extent in the chat that what I meant, sort of that there are in these types very clear focus on where you should put most of your attention. And clearly, sort of, if you are talking about research and innovation action, it will incorporate generating of new knowledge more prominently than innovation action, sort of, which has very clear different expectations. And if we know that multi-actor approach as such sort of reacts to these different outputs very differently, and then it makes sense that you really think about how you structure your multi-actor approach or the way how you implement it in your particular proposal, taking into consideration sort of these prominent directions where the project is expected to go. But that's sort of, I'm not sure, did I capture the question correctly?
Yeah, Bojana, if that was not yet answered, then you just come back. Andrew, when you were speaking, a question from the last brokerage event came up. Somebody asked, would a letter of intent, a support letter, be sufficient to show that a user perspective has been included in the proposal development and supports the project and so on and so forth? And although we are focusing in Premiere project, and you mentioned the liaison project, which we worked on before, have dealt a lot with these actor versus stakeholder and user representatives involved in the core group in order to drive the work program and really feed into new developments and testing and so on and so forth. It remains a challenge because not everybody, as you mentioned, can be a full partner, will be a full partner in the consortium. So back then I answered, no, a letter of intent will definitely be not enough. And plus there is no option to add letters of intent. However, the idea behind it could actually serve the idea of what you called the constant dialogue. So when you develop your proposal, you can actually have, without payment and without further involvement of a partner in the project work, you can have constant dialogue with whatever, a wine cooperative when it is dealing with wine production or whatever. And later on, you pull that forward. How should applicants deal with this challenge, actually?
The clue. And I'm hoping that Elke, with her broader experience of submitting proposals, may have a view. This letter of intent thing, for all the years that I was involved in submitting project proposals, I never had a clear answer from anybody as to their appropriateness. I've been involved in consortia that have submitted a huge number of letters of intent. I think maybe we did it with Liaison as well in support of the project proposal, but whether the evaluators take them into account or not, I doubt it, quite honestly. I think they're instructed only to look at the 30 pages or the 45 pages. Again, speaking personally and really off the top of my head, one could perhaps accumulate these letters of intent and put a sentence or two in the project proposal, bearing in mind again every word counts and you don't have much space, that letters of intent have been received from either 30 organisations or 5 farmers' organisations, 13 such organisations, or list every individual organisation, depending what space you have. So maybe you can try to demonstrate in that way that again, as part of the dialogue all along the project, that you've engaged with these partners prior to submission. But I would be more convinced by a diverse range of stakeholder engagement activities that are not one size fits all. So, you'll deal with the strategic working group in this way, but you will deal with different groups in that way. Like we have macro-regional stakeholder panels, which take into account the regional diversity across the EU that otherwise would be overlooked, and so on. So I think a convincing stakeholder engagement strategy would be much more effective than a whole bunch of letters of intent. That's purely a personal view.
Thank you. Elke, you want to add?
I must also say, I don't really know whether we have experience in sending them along. So it's not a common practice, at least. But I do agree with Andrew that I think having a stakeholder engagement strategy and structure in your project, a way of how to structure that involvement, is really important. And I think in very different projects, you find very different and very inspiring ways of how people are doing that. For example, in the Premiere, we have the 100+ LinkedIn Club. It's one way, a digital way of involving people. And one of a project that I was engaged with Michaelis, and Michaelis was the one who was leading this task. We had a network of ambassadors. We had 40 young people from Europe, and they came to all our project meetings, and they were involved there to shed their light on what we were doing. In other projects, people work with living labs, with external advisory boards. So there are lots of different ways of doing that. And it's a way of not involving everybody as a full partner, because that's not always possible. And people are not always interested in being a full partner in a project as well. But it is a way to keep them involved and especially to also get their input for what you're doing and whether they find it relevant or not for their activity in agriculture or food or wherever they are.
Yeah, thank you. But we need to keep in mind that this is really about the stakeholder involvement, this constant dialogue, keeping the users in mind. And at the same time, the actors need to represent a group. So those really driving the core work, the proposal, and then later on the core work in the core group. Not everybody needs to be paid, could be also an advisor or so who is really closely related to the project. That is the actor in the multi-actor consortium. And related to that, Andrew, I have another question for you, because there is also this section of partner description on the system, actually, where you enter your researchers and then the achievements with these 5 boxes in the system. So this is independent from your 30 or 50 pages. But this is on the system. You enter the names, who has been allocated to the project and so on. And under these 5 achievements, usually scientific papers are added there for research projects. But would that be also First question, do evaluators look at those called achievements of the different organizations who are full partners in the project? And secondly, would it make sense to add here in this section of achievements also something like we have a practice research network with a group of 20 crop farmers ongoing since 10 years and working on these kind of questions. Did you see in your evaluation process that somebody used this section explicitly to emphasize, yes, we have the competences to facilitate multi-actor processes?
This is in the part A, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's some years actually since I've been involved. So, you know, getting old as I am, my memory fades. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. And again, I'll be a little bit controversial. And in my experience, say, no evaluator reads the part A's. And I think that's a big shame. And I think we had this discussion when we were putting together the Premiera project proposal, that we did see the potential of using the Part A as a resource to emphasize the diversity of capacities in the consortium. And I'm not sure to what extent we did that, whether we did it as well as we should have done. And quite honestly, even if we did, I don't think it would have had the impact that it should have done. And certainly when I've looked at some of the other, when I've done evaluations, looked at some of the other Part A's, they're pathetic, quite honestly. That they failed, totally failed to use that potential. So I think there is something there that maybe could be fed back into the Premiera work as a potential recommendation to the EU, that this exactly as you say, and as Elke said, with the 30 pages or 45 pages, every word being important, to use the Part A as an extra resource to get your message across.
I came across this because I was reading for the explanations on the official portal of the European Union on open science and the evaluation of open science requirement. And one recommendation was to give evidence on how to use open science, open access to documents by putting your scientific research into this section A. So that's why I was triggered if we might be able to use this also for the multi-actor recommendations that we feed back to the Commission. Michaelis, when you did your interviews and your survey with those developing proposals, did you come across this Part A question?
But to be honest, not really. I don't think that people were reflecting much on how they are structuring that. It was mainly about the proposal in general. But also, I have experience reviewing academic, sort of purely academic projects, non-academic projects, and purely market-oriented projects. And on the one hand, I have to agree with Andrew that I haven't heard often that people are really referring in detail regarding the Part A. But then I feel that also sort of, at least in my experience, it has been that nobody is really looking for a particular predefined set of experiences that sort of predefine a good coordinator. It's rather sort of looking at the different arguments together that illustrates like this particular coordinator can do the job, and sort of it doesn't. So it might be that in some other panels, it really plays a crucial role that you have an academic coordinator or somebody else, but not that I have come across this situation.
I have another question for you, Michaelis, because you said at a certain point in your presentation, coordinator needs to show strong leadership. And I immediately thought, well, there's a risk also. Yes, you need clear guidelines, which way you go, you need to agree on your rules of communication and so on and so forth. But if you say strong leadership of a coordinator, there is a risk of top-down governance structures, which contradicts the co-creation process, which co-creates to having everybody a say on equal levels and so on. Can you maybe explore a little bit when you said strong leadership of a multi-actor project?
Well, it is, you are definitely right. That's a very contradictory thing to say. And also the position of coordinator is very sort of contradictory, and it requires very different skills. And I said that because from our evaluation, both quantitative and qualitative, very clearly strong coordinator immediately was flagged by people with whom we engaged as a key prerequisite of successful research, or not research, but project proposal. Sort of as the pathways or pathway cartoons that have been developed for Premiere illustrates that there are different ways, of course, how to do it, and there are some that sort of successfully multi-actor wash the proposal, sort of they introduce it, but it's very strongly top down, and they are just imposing what there should be. And I mean, probably what I meant by saying strong leadership is the fact that, as I said, multi-actor amplifies very many challenges. So if you knows that you need a lot of time to write a successful proposal, you need even more to write a successful multi-actor project proposal. If you know that you have to really sort of work on aligning different skills, sort of that it is challenging, it will be even more challenging once you come up with multi-actor project proposal. And sort of coordinator is the one sort of that has to deal with this complexity. Sort of it has to offer space for debate, but on the other hand, sort of have to have the instruments to move the proposal further and make sure that it is submitted at the end. And sort of the strong leadership implies both, that there is some decision making, clear structure, transparency, but also sort of that somebody is willing to listen and willing to pull together these different perspectives.
Elke, you want to add to this? From your experiences, strong leadership in multi-actor projects is different to top-down?
You have both, but I must say that my personal experience of the project that me as a person has been in, not all my colleagues, is that mostly we find more co-creative leadership, or more like the leadership in which there's a lot of possibility of dialogue and input from everyone. So I haven't really experienced like a strong top-down leadership.
Because you select your partners also, probably.
Yeah, probably. Although I do experience, I've had some frustrations as myself, that when a partner really does not perform, leaders also don't intervene or don't do anything. And that can be a bit frustrating for the other ones. And we were talking about an academic partner who was not doing its job. So it was not not a multi-actor partner, or not somebody who is not experienced to be in these kind of projects.
Bernardo.
Yeah, I may have I don't know if a final question for the panelists. Some of you have explained, spoken about the difficulties of engaging, for example, small, medium enterprises, farmers, maybe because they don't have the administrative capacity, or maybe because they are not used to do research or innovation. I also have the experience of being difficult to work with big companies, because they always claim that this is research and outputs they are producing is confidential and difficult to share the information. But based on my experience, the most difficult was to engage effectively policymakers. Because even if they like the proposals, later on they are very busy, or they don't have time to participate in the projects. For me, based on my experience, this was one of the most difficult engagements process. I don't know if you can say something or give some tips about how to work with these difficulties with policymakers.
Elke, you have experiences?
Yes and no. So yes, but now in one project that is dealing with nudging farmers towards more environmental practices, actually policy reached out to us and to the project. It's a European project, but it's Flemish policy reaching out to us to implement some nudges in their farmers need to, I don't know what you call it in English, but they need to get their payments. They need to register all sort of things in a portal as well, to get some nudges in there so that they would be inclined to also do some more good practices for soil management. So we are very surprised what this will go to 20,000 farmers. And that's then, of course, the advantage, because it comes from policy and they all are obliged to fill in these registration obligations. So that's one case in which we had a direct link with policy. On the other hand, from my personal experience here with policy in Flanders, it just takes a very long time. They don't involve with us as well with immediate project or specific projects, but in the end, you do see that they pick up things. So we try to write policy briefs to them based on the projects that we do and the results that we have, and it might take like 10 years or longer, but sometimes then you see, we said that once in a policy brief and now they're getting into it. So very difficult. I do understand what you're saying, and it's you have to be very patient.
Nicholas?
Yeah, I just want to say I do understand what you are saying, and to some extent I agree. But then on the other hand, I think it's all different actors, how they have their particular sort of limitations. And I wouldn't say that policymakers are particularly difficult in this regard. Sort of our experience is that sort of if you recognize their limitations, if you recognize sort of what are the challenge, sort of their time frame, and you are willing to sort of work with the issues that they are listing as important for them, then our experience have been that they are very open. And sort of if you are consciously planning budget and realizing sort of how the financial flows will go, and not just realize that sort of it will work out somehow, then it works. In my mind, the discussion regarding the size of different partners maybe is more important and sort of should be addressed more, rather than how different type of actors operate.
Anda.
Yeah, just very brief add-on. I think it depends on the level of the policy making that you're referring to. It might be more challenging at the national level, but I would suggest going for the local level and regional municipalities, because they have like a more grounded approach to their problems. And if the topic of the call or the proposal that you're developing aligns with the strategy of the local government or their orientation towards where they're heading, then I think it can nicely align with that. And again, I think it's also very much a question of individuals, because as we know, we're not working with organizations per se. We're working with people representing specific organizations, and it can make a huge difference whether it's an enthusiastic person coming in, or it's just someone taking the sort of the position, but without personal investment. So I think it's also very important to keep in mind. Yeah.
And then this long-term relationship that Elke emphasized. We also in Premiere, we really build on the previous project, since we have engaged in the liaison project already with the same stakeholder group, and policy in particular, then confidence is there. And plus they have to be reminded, so we are still here, we have something to offer. This regular engagement, friendly, knocking at the door, not be too pushy, but providing support and so on. It is a lot of diplomacy working with officials. Yeah, I think we are at the end. What do you think, Bernardo?
Yes.
Do we have any further questions, or shall we share the last slide and give a quick idea of what's coming up next?
Yeah.
So this is our next webinar in the end of April, 29th of April, in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, 3:30. Who brings what to the consortium? Using the Premiere consortium building tool for effective consortium. And we will have our ILVO team members of Elke, presenting their tools. So something very practical in preparation for a multi-actor proposal. And with that, I would like to thank everybody. Have a good day and thanks very much, and look out what's happening in Premiere, and we are here to help and provide support. So thanks a lot to Bernardo, who provided the technical assistant and the long expertise helping with the webinars, and all our speakers. Thanks a lot and see you soon. And our participants also have a good day. Bye. Thanks.